Hello, welcome to Ms. Cooper's art class. Today I'm going to be talking about ballpoint pen and the line direction that you use as you are drawing. This is a great way to get warmed up. I have a couple sheets of paper on top of each other so I don't pick up the desk texture, and I'll be using some ballpoint pens. I have Papermate Ink Joy pens, but you can use any pen. I have three colors. I have light blue, brown, and black, just to have some variety. So the first thing we want to think about is what is line direction and why does it matter? And I'll keep this brief. So when you work with a ballpoint pen, as opposed to other things, you usually have to just work in lines. You can't really kind of scribble back and forth. So you can make all of your lines go one direction for some smooth shading. You could make them crisscross each other a little bit with some cross hatching and build up your texture that way. But one thing that's useful is curving your lines with the shape that you are drawing. So for example, a nose or some hair, um, instead of cross-hatching them so that you end up with something a little bit smoother. So consider your line direction carefully, and this is a way that you can practice a couple different types of line direction. So you could use a triangle, rectangles, circles, or spheres. And I like to practice these kind of braided or little rope segments. I find that useful as well. So I'll walk you through how I do each of those things. So let's look at triangles first. What I like to do with triangles is I like to kind of draw a bunch of dots and then connect all of them to end up with a whole bunch of little triangles. Kind of looks like I'm looking at a gem or something. I pick one direction that I'd like my shading to go, and then I just start pulling some lines that direction in kind of a fan shape. So they all radiate out from one point and they do not crisscross each other. As I'm laying down my lines, I use some light pressure, and then I can always build. You'll notice the middle naturally becomes darker because all of the lines are radiating out from there. And then if there's a little bald spot, I can always add another line right there, very lightly and carefully. And this is a great way to build up some smooth shading and practice with a whole bunch of different triangles next to each other. And then you can always add in cross-hatching and try it out. The whole point of the triangles, it's kind of a nice confidence builder because if you have one that doesn't look as good, it's hidden with all the other ones. It's also a good time to test a bunch of different colors and ways of working with your shading, so you could do other line directions. I just like using this to practice a fan shape. It's good for things like the corners of eyes or any kind of sharp objects that you might be working with when you are, using ballpoint pen as a drawing tool. So I like these because, if there's little imperfections, they kind of get lost among all the other triangles. And that's how artwork tends to be as well. So this is one great practice that you could try. Another thing you could try is, just a good old rectangle or a square. Pick one line direction and all the lines go that direction, a bunch of straight lines. So I do a bunch of little tick marks. I kind of build up my dark value, then my medium, then my light. And you might be wondering why I have this zoomed out so far when I'm doing it. It's just to give you the general idea. If you want more specifics, I do have a basic ballpoint pen shading video that could be helpful. So you can see I'm just laying them down carefully next to each other. If there's kind of a bald area, I just fill it right in. It's a great way to get warmed up if you don't have a lot of time. So let's take a look at the circle or the sphere, and this is one of my favorites, not because it's easy, but because it is a little bit difficult, and it's a good way to make sure I'm paying attention and my brain is warmed up when I'm about to work with ballpoint pen. So what I do is I outline a circular object and I start building in the shadow. When I work with ballpoint pen, I like to work dark to light. It's a curved object, so when I'm thinking about my line direction, I want to take a bunch of straight lines and slowly kind of bend them and change the direction of the lines to go with my figure, which is that sphere. And at the same time, I'm lightening them up as I go, so I'm easing off some of that pressure. And I do end up cross-hatching a little bit to fill in those spaces as I add that ballpoint pen, but I'm still being careful about the line directions I choose. You'll notice at the bottom of the sphere, the lines basically all go the same way, but at the top, they cross-hatch. But I was still careful when I was cross-hatching to make sure they only went a few directions. So you can see they're all going the same direction, different directions. But when I cross-hatched, I only really went two main directions, just to make it look a little bit smoother and more curved. If you start throwing in any wild directions or third ones that are just very different, you'll end up with some inconsistent shading. So we want to pick just one or two line directions. And the last one, my favorite, is kind of these like little rope or braid segments. This is a good place to kind of play around with shading some parts more than others, and not focusing too much on smooth shading, but just playing with that line direction and what happens if you do have some textures in there. Oftentimes when you're doing things like portraits, or even if you were drawing a bowl of fruit or something, everything has a little bit of texture to it that's probably not perfectly smooth. So this is a good place to just practice what happens if there are some darker areas or some different textures. You could do each segment a different texture. One could be like hair, one could be super duper smooth, one could look like glass or metal. Mine all look kind of like hair, I think. But it's a good way to get warmed up and make sure that you're paying attention as you're getting started. Sometimes I find that I'm not paying attention to what I'm doing and my work becomes a little bit lazier or sloppier. So this is a good way to wake up your brain and get energized before you start doing a drawing. And honestly, you could fill an entire piece of paper with these little braid or rope things and just make them really big, and you'd have something that would still be wonderful to look at. Anyway, thanks for sticking around and learning some different ways to create ballpoint pen texture and shading with different line directions. Hopefully this was something that was helpful. You can always ask questions in the comments if you want to. Give this a like if this was helpful, and subscribe for more. I love ballpoint pen drawing. Thanks for watching.